Hey everyone, it's Christina of Crafty Paws. I'm super excited and so honored to be the guest designer for MarkerPOP, and I'm here to help introduce the bi-weekly challenge, which for this challenge, the theme is watercoloring florals. I've used the Altenew Peony Bouquet and the Majestic Bloom stamp sets to create beautiful watercolored cards for my mother and my mother-in-law for Mother's Day. I can't believe I'm actually ahead of the game this time. It's so rare for me. I also use the sentiment stamps from the Greeting Farms I Love Mom stamp set, which was released last year. And I think this is so easy and fun to do watercoloring using Ken Oliver color bursts. I just used 4 different color burst colors and look at the results. It's amazing. Color bursts make anybody, even an amateur like me, come out with projects that look like a pro did them. I hope you guys enjoy the process video, which I'll share next. I first start off with some Strathmore Bristol watercoloring paper. I think it's actually just paper that actually can handle a lot of moisture, and I like the Bristol paper because it's really smooth, but it doesn't warp too much with even a lot of water added. And what I've done here is I've heat embossed with clear embossing powder using Versamark ink the outline floral stamps from both stamp sets. I'm doing 2 cards, but actually I'm just going to show you the second card. And then I wet down the center area of the flowers and the base of each petal with just plain water and a paintbrush. And then I am going through and I sprinkled on some of the ultramarine blue, and I'm just activating it by wetting the pigment crystals with water on a paintbrush. It's really easy, and the crystals have such intense colors that just adding a little bit of water activates it, and the intensity of the color is just spectacular. I'm using a silver black velvet paintbrush in the 6 point, which is kind of a medium point. I like how much coverage I can get with kind of the middle of the paintbrush, but I also like the really fine tip on the ends, so I can get kind of more detailed, finer lines of pigment as I brush out just with the tip of the paintbrush. And after heat embossing the image, it's really easy to watercolor because it kind of creates kind of a wall so that the paint doesn't go outside the lines, as it were. I'm really messy, so it does go outside the lines a little bit, but that's okay because watercoloring is kind of more of a loose, free form kind of painting, at least floral watercoloring, I think. So I'm okay if it goes a little bit outside the lines. And I'm just trying to create some color variation, more dark in certain areas, kind of at the bases of different petals, and I'm stretching out the pigment to a lighter shade on the outside of each of the petals. At the base of each of the petals, even the ones that overlap behind the petals that are closer to the center of the flower, I'm reapplying the paint crystals. And now you don't see it here, but what I just did was I added water to the base of the petals of the little bud that I heat embossed on the flip side of the card. And I sprinkled on some pigment, and I cut that out because actually my camera didn't focus well right there. But as you can see, I'm doing the exact same thing as I did for the bigger bloom with the small bud. And I'm just stretching out the pigments with just plain water on my paintbrush after I have sprinkled on a little bit of the crystal pigment powder. And I'm just using the tip there so I can get really into the details of the little bud. And I'm going right along the edges, and I am actually doing this in a blue not only because the inspiration photo for the challenge was blue, I think it was lavender maybe, or wisteria, I'm not really sure. But these are big, beautiful blooms, and it just so happens that both my mom and my mother-in-law love blue. And you saw what I did there. I just clipped in a little bit of my heat setting. As I'm coloring, I don't want the colors to bleed too much into each other or blend too much and get muddy. So between certain coats of adding watercoloring, I'm heat setting it. Now I'm going back into the center areas of the flowers as well as the base of each petal again, re-wetting everything because everything is dry now, remember, and I'm re-wetting it with just plain water because I'm going back in and I'm sprinkling in violet. I want the kind of bigger variation of color, and I'm careful not to squeeze the bottle, but just tap the bottle from the backside. And even then I think I had too much pigment, so I dusted that off as you saw there. And activating again these crystals just with a little bit of water, and look at that intense violet color. I love how intense these colors are. And I'm just spreading out the color right over top of where I had the ultramarine blue, but really trying to concentrate on the base of each petal as well as the center of the flower. And really, watercoloring is so forgiving. If you go outside a little bit of the area that you thought you were going to be painting, especially with florals, I mean, there's nothing exactly perfectly symmetrical or anything like that in nature. So watercoloring florals is a great way to start with watercoloring if you don't have a lot of experience watercoloring. And I think the colors blend so beautifully with these Ken Oliver color bursts. As you can see here, I'm just trying to go back in with a little bit more detail, adding in the violet, and I'm stretching out as if almost like the petals have veins. I'm trying to bring out just the tip, using the tip of the paintbrush to extend that color out a little bit further in each of the petals. I'm trying to get an intense color at the base of the petals and lighten out the color as I go toward the outside edge of the petals. And if you feel like the color is too intense, just dab it with a tissue like I just did there. And I really like the color variations a lot with these Ken Oliver color bursts. They're intense, but they blend so beautifully together. Now I'm doing the same technique again. I'm putting a little coat of water down, and now I'm just tapping the backside of the bottle. It's really amazing how just a few little crystals of the pigment have so much intensity once you activate it with water. And I just painted on a little bit of water at the base of each petal just so that it would catch the crystals of pigment, and then I'm taking a wet paintbrush and activating more of the pigment and painting it out. You see me here trying to get a little bit more detail in, just using the tip of the paintbrush. And again, because this is heat embossed, there's like a little bit of a raised area, and so it's really easy to try and kind of stay in the lines. Now, outside of each of the blooms, I wanted to create kind of a blurred effect, almost like a bouquet effect, but just have the sense of greenery, kind of the green of the bush from which this beautiful bloom is blooming. And so I'm wetting all around the outside edge of the flower just with plain clean water. And that's something else that it doesn't show up in the video, but between each pigment, and sometimes during the use of a pigment, I will go and change my water bowl out. You see me just tapping very lightly on the back side of this Ken Oliver color burst. This is, I think, Verte Verde. It's kind of a more kind of dusty green. And then I'm using a yellow ochre because I wanted to mix in a little bit of a kind of a lighter hue, and I thought the yellow would add kind of a highlight even though it's behind the bloom. And now I'm just using the plain water again with my paintbrush and going into the nooks and crannies of the edges of the flower. This bloom is from the Majestic Bloom stamp set, and the petals are really much more detailed. So there's lots of ins and outs on these petals, and just trying to get into them, I think with a fine paintbrush, it's much easier than if you had like a big round brush. This one has a really nice point. And by the way, this and all the other materials that I'm using, I will link in the blog post, which I will have in the description box below. Now you see me adding kind of the green areas behind the bloom, underneath the bloom. And you saw maybe briefly kind of me stretching out on the edges there, just more water, because I didn't want any kind of water edge lines. I wanted to try and keep it really soft on the edges, outside edges of where this green is. And I'm just adding water, and as I activate each of the little pigment crystals, it's amazing how much color intensity comes from these little granules. And now I'm doing the exact same thing for the tiny little bud. I'm going all around the bud with just plain water, just so that it can catch the pigment granules. And then I'm going to tap on that Verte Verde, and then tap on just a little bit of the yellow ochre as well. And then I'll go back just again with a wet paintbrush and activate all of that intense color. That came out to be kind of a big blob of green, so I dabbed it up with a tissue, as you see there. Watercoloring with these watercolor crystals, these color bursts, is so much fun. It really makes an amateur watercolorist like me come out with projects that I think look so painterly. And now I'm just kind of making sure that the two buds, the bud and the big bloom, kind of blend together in the background. And I'm just taking water and doing that between the two flowers. And now I decided I wanted a little more intense color underneath this big bloom. So I tapped on a little bit more of that Verte Verde, and I'm going back in just to add a little bit more dark so that the flower will, pop a little bit more off of the card front. I layered the card front with white cardstock and put it on a black card base, and then stamped out the sentiment using white embossing powder and cut that out, pop that up on fun foam, and that's it. Those are the two Mother's Day cards that I made using color bursts. I hope you enjoyed this process video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up, and thanks so much for watching. I hope you guys are having a wonderful crafty day.